Hi, Marcelo.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. So I wanted to ask you some questions today. Um, Let me get them up. Is there anything that personally or professionally has really made a big difference in terms of actually being able to do this work? Any milestones that have been significant for you?
Yeah, I think it's been a learning process, which I would say my trajectory as an artist is that I'm often doing things and I don't realize that I'm doing it. I was, for example, I, I was I was working in interactive installation and there was live people in it, and somebody told me that I should look into performance. I was quite young. I was like, performance? Isn't that theater? I had no idea. And actually, I was fully doing on a kind of some live art type practices. And just with the social engagement as well, I think I was really committed to working in a kind of more socio and political field. But I didn't realize that there was this thing called socially engaged practice. I didn't, now I really see myself as part of like a historical trajectory, but I, I didn't at the time that I was engaging in this work. What I did come to learn, and I think was a huge milestone for me, was that there was a big difference between studio practice and the kind of virtuous artist that produces this incredible work of art alone, and working collaboratively and working with people and sharing ideas, and that actually this artist persona doesn't necessarily fit in those contexts as neatly, because it's not really about your virtuosity and skill. It's more about how you can subsue your ego and open up your creative process. And that, that was a learning curve, because we're educated in art schools to have this vision, have this style, have this thing that only you can say, and actually you have to work against that when you start working in socially engaged practice. And that took a while, but I think I already had it within me, which is why I was drawn to the work.
Good. So it's not like I am the creator. I know the creative process and I'm a facilitator of that. And yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that the artist's voice isn't important. It's
No.
totally central. And it's very, very respected within groups of people that you work with. They really want that. But it doesn't mean that you're right, or that just because you are knowledgeable within this field, it doesn't mean that the ideas and the things that come to you in collaborative practice make your dreams of what you want to achieve just so much better. That's what I think working collectively is.
What about challenges? Has there been any particularly challenging moments in your journey so far?
I think the nature of this work is that it's constantly challenging. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One of them is that often social engaged practice tends to sit at the bottom of the funding totem pole. And that is because we are not necessarily product oriented. So we don't have outcomes that fit the current market economy that we live in. And as such, it can be really difficult to fund, because funding often in our kind of culture looks at return on investment. And when that return on investment is social, although we have some ways of measuring that, it's not quite as clean cut, and it's really hard to make the case sometimes. So I think that's one of the big challenges, is around how we access funds, how we make the case for the work that we're doing, how we fund a project that's process-based, where I can't tell you what the end result will be. All those things can be really challenging. The other thing that we've chatted about a lot through the Social Art Network and through some of the meetups and the different things like Assembly and Summit that we've done, is how we're able to create spaces where we share in our failures, not just our celebration. And I think as an artist, and it's not just a social practice artist, but all artists, you know, you want to show the best thing that you do, and you want it to be celebrated, and you want to really present yourself as this model of success. But that is like, you know, this Instagram society where everything is a version, and it's the best version, and it can be quite problematic. And the nature of working within a social context is that it's the world that we live in. It's full of highs and lows. It's full of good and bad. It's full of beautiful and ugly. And those things are intrinsic to the work. And so how can we celebrate the work while celebrating the failures? And that is a really interesting thing that I'm still struggling with. I think we're trying to define how that is. Can we make a funding application and talk about all the things that might go wrong? It would be fantastic. So that's one of the things I think around this practice that is about complexity. As we all know, as human beings on this earth, nothing brings us more complexity than other people. So it also brings us the incredible joy. I mean, that's the nature of being alive. So when you dedicate your art to that, to being with people, you're going to have both those realms. And that's part of the practice.
Do you call yourself an artist? You know, do you identify as an artist?
So the artist identity is a tricky one. I do consider myself an artist, and I think it depends which kind of settings I go into. If I go in as the artist, I think it can be sometimes intimidating or off-putting. Sometimes I refer to myself as a creative practitioner because I think the word artist has a lot of connotations that can sometimes be a bit conventional in terms of like, are you a sculptor or a painter? Right, maybe I can do those things, but I don't really express myself in traditional forms. And again, just thinking about this idea of the artist as, you know, holding talent, which is inborn, as opposed to a type of skill which can be learned. And so, although I do consider myself creative, I do consider myself as working as an artist. Often I use those terms because they're the conventional terms in which I can get people to understand my practice. But when I enter into different community settings, I think I often choose how I define myself according to the work that I'm doing. So for example, I'm about to publish a book for a residency I did in a nature reserve in Wales, very exciting. And it's like an alternative walking guide to this valley. And when I met with people, and I met with farmers and rangers and residents, I tried not to come in saying, I'm an artist, I'm doing this work, because it actually closed doors. But if I came in and I said, you know, I'm somebody that loves nature, and I like storytelling, and I want to write some stories, and I want to do some drawings, and think about this place, people are much more open to have a conversation with you. So maybe for me, although I do see myself as an artist, I wouldn't necessarily walk around proclaiming that identity, because notions of what that means can be quite fixed.
I was thinking, I was identifying, so I don't know whether this is me or whether it's actually a question for you, but I was thinking, oh, yeah, maybe thinking of yourself as an artist has its usefulness in terms of an inner context for yourself, sometimes more than external proclamations.
Totally, 100%. I was really inspired by a conference I went to many years ago about hacking. And it was all sorts of hacking, you know, like life hacking and digital hacking and all sorts of hacking. And there was this speaker, this South African guy, and he said something that really inspired me, and it really made me think a lot, especially about this topic of artist identity. And he said that what happens is that people develop their identity first, and then try to navigate through life with this fixed identity. And what that does is it causes very little flexibility amongst the things that might come at you. And what he was suggesting in terms of life hacking was that you potentially used your identity a little bit more like improv actors who are on stage, and you throw them a word and they just turn it into an incredible scene. And that maybe your identity and the things that you see as your end goals, if you're a little bit more malleable to the situations that unfold around you, then that identity can shift and change. And I think there it becomes really useful to think about what that word artist means, or what it might mean in different settings, because it can mean different things. And you can still hold that artist identity that you hold really dearly within you, but you don't necessarily have to be that kind of artist out in the world. You can still be a creative person, however you find fulfillment.
How has your practice evolved over time, and what's driven that?
Right. So I began, I was very interested my degree show when I was younger was about interactive installation. I was interested in space. My father was an architect. I was interested in how we use space and navigate spaces. I like to create environments and installations that you could be immersed in. And I come from a very politically engaged family. My parents were from Chile, very kind of strong history of politics, 70s into 80s, some of which I grew up in. And they really informed me in terms of being aware and dedicated to giving back to the community. So when I studied my degree, and I realized that I was really invested in being an artist, a creative practitioner, and making somehow a cultural producer, I felt like the best way that I could produce culture would be in a way that was inclusive and that gave back to people. And so I began to think about ways in which my creativity and the work that I liked making could re-inform social spaces. I had also worked out of my MA. I met a group of cohorts, very different kinds of disciplines, incredibly creative. We formed a collective, and at the time we're doing a lot of immersive theater work, which really fit with my idea of installation and immersive environments, and working with people. And so immersive theater really fit within that, even though my background is in the arts, not necessarily in theater, but I learned a lot through that about applied drama. And I became really interested in applied drama, but I wanted to move away from the constructs of theater, which felt a bit to me artificial. I like to be really in the world and interested in how the arts could be a type of intervention. So I started thinking about how applied and performance potentially could exist in the world, and how the artist could be a catalyst for that. And I ended up doing, I got funding to do a doctoral research, which I entitled Applied Live Art. And applied live art is what I call my practice, because it's about me being with people, making work, and the work is live and the work is together. So I see it as applied live art. And that was really interesting. That was really what set me up on my kind of career path, creating work with different communities. I was lucky enough to get funding. I did a project in a deconsecrated church in Naples, Italy, in a very, very poor area where there was some mafia infighting at the time, which is called the Camorra there. And people were like, "You're crazy, you walk around with your laptop in your bag." And I said, "But you know, I'm an outsider here. I'm not part of the violence that's happening there. And actually there's an incredibly resilient community, and they are so thankful I'm doing a project here, and they've got my back. I feel fine." And I did. And I went to, I had a friend who was working with an NGO in Ghana, in the north part of Ghana, near the border of Togo and Burkina Faso. And we worked with a very, very large boarding school there to do an education project. He was running an NGO arm that did HIV/AIDS prevention, and asked me to come in to use my practice as a way to do this work. So we created a big performance festival with the young people. And I learned so much about the way that culture is produced through music and dance in African villages, where it's really intrinsic to being part of a community. And that really inspired me to think more about how immersive theater, how about installation art, about social practice could be a thing that exists in society where people are really expressing themselves culturally. Mm. And the last project I did for that research was in Beirut, Lebanon, where I worked with a theater company there, and we did the site-specific performances across 3 locations in Beirut that were kind of secret locations you could only find out the day of the performance. And it was thinking about how work could be really politicized just because of its context, even though what we were producing was not political in the least. But when you're in Beirut at that time, which was a year after Hezbollah had just taken over the center as a show of force and then retreated, and 2 years after Israel had bombed the city again, it was a very contentious move and quite a difficult piece to pull off, but a real learning about how, you know, you don't need to go head on into politics, because working with people is to bring the political into the work. And you can talk about any other, you can talk about any other sorts of topics, but that will always kind of be it's almost like a cloud or a buzz of energy around it. And that was really informative. That really taught me a lot too. And since then, I've done so many projects that have then built upon that learning. And that's where I am today.
What are you working on at the moment?
At the moment, I'm super busy, which is incredible, because as all artists know, there are times when you're very busy and there's times when you're very poor. And at the moment, I'm very busy, so I'm very happy and I'm very lucky. I am about to go to Kelburn Garden Party in Scotland, in southwest Scotland. It's an arts and music festival, and they've got an area. It's in it's on the Kelburn estate, where there's an incredible 13th century castle covered head to toe in graffiti from a project they did with artists from Sao Paulo. And they have something called the Never-Ending Glen, which is part of this nature bit of the forest with installations. And in there, I've got a large tent, which is a project of mine called the Print Shop Rise Up. And that is a space for people to come and voice their concerns and turn them into slogans. And then we print them on t-shirts, and they're asked to wear the t-shirt over the festival period as a flash mob. It's a kind of invisible theater piece. For this iteration of it, I am focusing on climate change anxiety. I'm really interested in how we might be able to manifest that anxiety into words as a way to A, deal with our own healing, but B, also engage other people in conversations. I work a lot in arts and health and in wellness. So this is also coming off the back of that. And later this month, I'll be in Wales for the book launch of Ellen Calls, which is a creative companion guide to the Elan Valley. I'm very excited about it. It's a 60-page book, and it's being printed by a new arm of the social art network called the Social Art Publications. Again, very super exciting. It's kind of collectively formed. It's in its beginning. We have 100 ISBNs to distribute, and we want to create not only a portfolio for artists who work in social practice to be able to have an ISBN to publish, but also a distributing wing so that we can know about each other's work, we can help each other out. I think there's just incredible power in having a network of artists who are dedicated to social engagement across the country. And that it's artist-led is even better. So I feel really quite excited about those two things at the moment.
The book, I'm sensing that it's different to your usual location landscape guide. What's different about it?
Yeah, the book is really interesting because it's my first published artist book. So I've had academic books published before and books around social practice, but this is an artist book. So it has drawings and creative writing. And what it is it's site responsive and site specific. And there's a map that invites you to go to 5 different locations in the valley. And in those locations, you sort of, you match up the drawing that I've made to the landscape, and it gives you some kind of, instructions how to get there. So it's a bit of a treasure hunt. And then there's stories that are written, but they're inspired by the landscape and the people. And there are a lot of it comes from conversations I've had with people, topics that have come up that seem really important. I've really spent time trying to investigate what would really honor not just nature, but the people who have been embedded in that nature for a long time. What was interesting about that was that the collaborative aspect of it was me just spending time with people. But then I took that and I spent a lot of time in my studio turning that into pieces of text and drawings and things like that. It was part of a artist residency that Ellen Links hosts. So you live for a month off grid in the valley. It's incredible. So it's been a very special thing. It's very special for me to be able to go to a place like Wales with such an incredible history and such a resilient culture, and be able to offer a gift like this. So it feels very, very special to have been welcomed in.
What support or decisions have made the biggest impact on your practice?
So one of the things that I'm going to just talk about something that is very recent, which I think is really, it's really helped me as an artist, which is the momentum that's happened with the Social Art Network. The Social Art Network is not like a charity organization with like trustees and a board. Absolutely not. It's a completely ad hoc, decentralized group that is now nationwide. And it's really just artists dedicated to social practice, wanting to stay in touch and keep together. It was something that I helped form with Elin Lee formally, let's say, in 2017, and it comes from the back of having spent some time really trying to think about how to create a support network for artists, because I felt, as an artist working in social practice, quite alone. And I was part of something called Community Geeks. Community Geeks did Hack the Barbican many years ago. They were an incredible group, meetup of different people interested in civic engagement, whether digital or governmental, or there was one of the junior doctors came that helped to run the strike at the time, all sorts of different people, but there weren't any artists. And I did think, I really want this for artists. I really want to know who are the other artists doing work like this. And I did meet, sometimes I would come across other creative practitioners. And then Elin Lee invited me into a collaborative arts peer forum, which was held at Peckham Platform. And it was 6 months, once a month, just to kind of meet up and talk about topics. And I came with this incredible energy out of being part of Community Geeks to really see if maybe this could be that space that we could find. As a result of that, Elin and I, we had a meetup where we merged Community Geeks and Social Art and the peer forum. And then we then talked about, can we formalize this? Can we make it bigger? And that's where the Social Art Network was born. And then from there, we got a project grant for the summit. The reason this is really important to my practice is because it has exposed me to incredible artists across the country doing like wildly valuable work. And that is ultra inspiring. It's inspiring, especially when you feel down and you feel like, why am I doing this? Should I keep doing this? Am I all alone? And then you think, actually, there's loads of people out there and you're not all alone. And it's a growing field and you have support. And that feels really good. And one of the things I remember, a young artist came up to me in Sheffield after the summit, and she said to me the most touching thing. She said, I used to feel really lonely, and now I don't feel so alone. That's massive. That's huge. That's really what we need to support each other. And that has really changed my practice, because it's made me not only personally feel more confident, but also meet so many other incredible people, which is useful. And it has really made me good connections for work as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
What's worked best for you when it comes to sharing and promoting your work? And have you chosen something that particularly suits your practice and personality?
Well, this is interesting because this is something that we've talked about recently with the coaching program that's happening between Kickstarter and Social Art Network for these 10 artists. And although I haven't, it's just begun, and potentially after I've had one of the sessions on marketing, I can talk more about this, although I will talk from a personal perspective. But one of the things they talk about is thoughtful marketing or quiet marketing. And I think for a lot of artists, the challenge is that one thinks of marketing and you think of like, I don't know, Tesco's or something. You think of like really shouty advertising and you think of getting people on board. And actually, that's often not how we may operate as individuals. And when you're creating a work of socially engaged practice, it's often not how you want to be viewed. And so for me, in terms of entering into a place where I'm the outsider and I'm trying to get people interested in what I'm doing, participate in it, and potentially create some sort of live program together, because a lot of my work is about live programming. I tend to work small in the beginning, and it's about building friendships and partnerships, allies, and word of mouth. And I never try to aim too big. I try to have steps along the way, including if I'm doing something public, that I don't ever go into a space where suddenly I launch a public thing, where I have maybe a couple of small public things in advance to get people to know me, to just test out ideas, to not be too imposing. So I think for me, it's about a slow build. And it's not too different to being like the new kid at school, you know, where you might be shy and then you make one friend and then you make a couple and then you join like a club and then suddenly you get well known. You know, you never walk in there as the popular one. Everyone's going to hate you.
Yeah. So you've talked a little bit about the Social Art Network. How can people get involved if this is the first time they're hearing about it and they're like, yeah, my work's socially engaged. How do I connect?
Absolutely. So the Social Art Network was really born out of meetups and peer forums, a space where artists can get together and have a conversation. That may sound simple, but it is incredibly valuable. We talk about how to manage stress. We talk about how to manage funding. We also make connections. I've been at meetups where somebody needs a certain kind of artist and that other type of artist is sat in the circle and they don't know each other. So there's a lot of different things. It's also sharing the kinds of challenges and learning from each other. So there's real power in just having a simple meetup. And that is really how the Social Art Network began and is the core of what it is. We try to do these big national meetups at least once a year. So our big launch event was the Social Art Summit in Sheffield, which was phenomenal. I was really just blown away by the impact and the work that was presented. And I helped organize it and I was still blown away. So it's, you know, it was just beyond my expectations. This year we had Social Art Assembly, which was a much simpler way of just coming together and having a conversation, still also really valuable. We'll hope to continue these kind of national conversations yearly. And then on a smaller scale, since Social Art Summit, when Social Art Summit happened, we had a planning meetups happening in Sheffield. We had a bunch of meetups that I had helped organize in London, but it was not official. Since the summit in 2018, there's now meetups happening in 8 to 10 different cities in the UK. That is pretty incredible. And that is led by an artist who is really dedicated to this and who is willing to just organize a date and a time in the calendar, maybe for 3 dates, maybe 4 dates, once a month, over the summer, over the autumn, something like that, and just do some promotion and get some people in there. At Social Art Assembly, which was held, it was kindly hosted by Tate Exchange this year. The meetup leads came from the different cities to present what they were talking about, and every single one was different. Some of them were treating it like a live work of art. Some of them were more research-based. Some of them had very specific topics that they were struggling with. It was, every single one was different, and that was fantastic. It's not like there's a formula. We do have some tips for how to run a meetup, but the meetups really are for anybody to take ownership of. The Social Art Network belongs to all of us. It will work if we all do it together. So really it's about somebody who, if there isn't one in your place, we can help you set it up. It's so simple. It's really just having a couple of chairs in a circle and a space where you can meet. Often those spaces where they meet are also spaces that are really valuable and interesting for social practice artists. And what ends up happening is that other things come out of the woodwork. So for example, right now, our next meetup in London is at a place called Newspeak, which is dedicated to activism and digital technology. They're not artists, but they're interested in what we're doing, and they're giving us a space to host that conversation. That only came out of just having these meetups. I had no idea that even existed.
Sounds
so
fantastic.
An example of being able to like be also present in different ways that we use the city.
Mm. So you are going to be speaking at our upcoming Truth Dare Art Social Practice Forum. What are you going to be talking about? What can people expect from that?
So at the forum, I'm going to be presenting 2 things. One is I'll be presenting my practice. So I'll talk about my work as an artist, how I use different types of events in terms of working socially and working site responsively. And I'm going to put a lens on education and young people, particularly because I know a lot of teachers are coming. It's not necessarily the focus of my work, but it absolutely plays in a lot of different factors. So I will emphasize that. So I'll show some videos and some photos, and I'll talk about my practice for a while. And then I'm going to talk about the Social Art Network, and I'm going to present the big event that we did, which was the Social Art Summit. I'll talk a bit about the network, how the networks can be formed, how it's multicellular, and I'm going to present the Social Art Summit because the dream is, and the goal and what we're working towards is to create the world's first social art biennial.
I just got too excited and I totally interrupted.
That's all right. Yeah. So we're gonna work towards presenting how the Social Art Summit can turn into the world's first social art biennial. The plan is to do it every 2 years. I don't know necessarily what we might call it. Maybe it could be like how Documenta has a name and happens every couple of years. But it will be a place to do a national review of practice. And as it grows, it could be worldwide. Right now, it's important for us to think about how the summit and the biennial are places where we bring all this social practice together that's happening to look at. And that's a real challenge because one, a lot of social practice isn't necessarily about traveling or taking it somewhere or representing it. Sometimes it's about the living moment, or sometimes it's process-based. And so it's about learning new ways of representing work. And secondly, we feel like if as artists working in social engagement, we have our finger on the pulse of society, then social practice can give us the blood reading, the temperature, the pulse of what's happening. And in the UK right now, we really need that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And I look forward to meeting you in person in a week or so.
You too. Thank you very much.